Are you studying a foreign language, but you're an introvert? And it's really not clear how to square the advice you get on here from gregarious YouTubers with feeling like you'd basically do anything to not have to go talk to a bunch of strangers in a foreign language in an unstructured way. I've been making a lot of language learning content lately, and I've started to get the same question enough that I realize it's time to make a video about it. That question is always some variation of, how should I set about learning a language as an introvert? Now, without getting too far ahead of myself, I identify as an introvert. Yes, I'm gregarious and outgoing, and I have a channel where I talk to hundreds of thousands of people. But going by some definitions of introversion, which I'll get to later in the video, none of that matters. The fact that I find all of that terribly exhausting rather than recharging and rejuvenating is part of it. So I feel you. So today I'm going to discuss just that: how to stop feeling awkward and how to learn a language as an introvert. And no, the answer is not just change who you are. New language, new personality, Linda. So Spanish Linda is fiery and outgoing. Nor is it learn Japanese and become an otaku. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and I love languages, linguistics, and language learning. Today I'm talking to all the introverts as much as they'd probably prefer I didn't. This is Language Jones. I don't take a lot of sponsors, and the ones I do, I use and I like. And today's video is sponsored by LingoPie. LingoPie is a video on-demand service that has a ton of cool features. I think it particularly shines with helping with listening comprehension for casual speech. That's because they provide simultaneous captions in both your target language and English. They allow looping of videos and audio by captions, and you can even slow down the playback speed to hear what's really going on. They've got mouse-over translation, you can add words to flashcards, and they even have quizzes, not to mention live classes and news in slow French and Spanish and German and so on. And my favorite, Netflix and Disney Plus integrations so you can watch hit shows in your target language. Don't sleep on the dubbed cartoons either. Actually, that was my favorite until I saw they have a section with best songs in your target language, so you can learn from the lyrics in hit songs. Accelerating your learning with music, which definitely helps with memory, while gaining fluency with slang and idioms and keeping on top of what's hot among speakers of your target language. And just how music speaks to the soul, so does food, which is why I've been binging cooking shows in Italian. Because that's a thing you can totally do, because we live in the future.
Che è una semola di grano duro. Abbiamo l'olio extravergine.
So if you'd like to continue binge watching your favorite shows but get better at French, Spanish, or any of these other languages, click my link in description or use my promo code at LingoPie to get started. You're not irresponsibly vegging out while binge-watching TV, you're optimizing language learning through passive and active comprehension practice in real-world communicative contexts, and maybe even learning how to make spaghetti aglio e olio. If that sounds right for you, definitely take advantage of my discount code. Now back to the video. When I did a teeny tiny modicum of research for this video, since that's what this channel is all about after all, I was shocked. Mostly because there's so much disagreement about introversion, but also there's some personalities in psychology who are kind of horrifying. I don't mean personality types like narcissist, I mean specific people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First thing, as usual, is that we should really define the parameters of what we're talking about. To my mind, introversion gets used to describe three distinct phenomena. There's introversion in the psychological sense, which is somewhat contested, but we can take a stab at a sort of rough definition. There's shyness, which is different, and there's anxiety, which is its own other thing. These will all basically need slightly different approaches. It's not one size fits all. Otherwise, you all wouldn't be asking this, because the advice would just be, just don't be an introvert. So introversion, it turns out, is another one of those Jungian things related to archetypes and shit. It was most widely popularized by the debunked and invalid MBTI, the Mega Big Texas Instruments, no, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and by a literal Nazi who, when he died, had 87 papers retracted over things like, and I quote, concocting data. His other papers were about exactly what you'd expect: racial differences in IQ. The history of psychology is so disappointing that it makes linguists feel slightly better about our own stupid field. Anyway, all of that is to say, take it with a huge grain of salt. But the idea is that introverts can be gregarious and outgoing and approachable and energetic, but they feel best and recharge best when they're in their fortress of solitude. And like, sure, okay, I know some theater people who feel like shit when you leave them alone because they start to wonder if they even exist, and then they just turn on when around other people. So I'm willing to entertain the idea that some people really get energized and recharged by social interaction. But also, A lot of the recent studies on introversion find that it's less who you are and how you feel and more what you do, and that everybody runs a full spectrum of extroverted and introverted behaviors. So it's just your balance and preferences, and those can change. Fine. Already, this alone can have implications for language learning approaches. But let's meet the other two contestants. Shyness is not the preference for quiet and minimally stimulating environments, at least not for their own sake. Rather, it's a fear of negative judgment. In fact, some psychologists map these as literally orthogonal to each other. God, I love academic speak. So they're two dimensions at 90 degrees. So you can be extroverted and shy. That's where you want to spend time with people and you get a lot of good from it, but you're anxious and afraid that they won't accept you, you won't fit in, you'll make a mistake, etc. And you can be introverted and stable. That's the technical term they use. Comfortable in yourself, but just, a loner. And lastly, we have anxiety. We all do now. But also, I just meant like as the third part of my list. I was maybe too strong with my terminology before. Shyness is feeling reserved and uncomfortable. Anxiety is much more powerful and is considered a clinical disorder. So social anxiety will be things like intense fear of interacting with others, replaying interactions over and over again after the fact, expecting the worst possible social situation to occur, avoiding new situations or even common everyday experiences that require social interaction. It's not, ugh, I just don't have the energy to deal with people today. It's abject terror at the thought of people having to deal with you. Here's as good a place as any for a disclaimer that while I am a doctor, I'm not that kind of doctor. And more importantly, if you're experiencing what you think may be consistent with social anxiety or any other anxiety disorder, you should seek out information on it from a qualified professional. I'm led to understand that help exists and treatment is available. And for those with actual anxiety, that's the real advice. Modifying your language learning routine can help with that one aspect of it, but that's not treating the root cause. So with those introduced, let's talk about tailoring a language learning routine to your needs. If you have social anxiety, then advice like taking classes with people, going out on the street and talking to randos and getting feedback, language exchanges, these are somewhere between absolutely mortifying and panic-inducing. So don't do them. You don't have to become a historical linguist, but I do know more than one with anxiety disorders, and as horrifying as the content of the tablets is, Ugaritic tablets don't judge you. Papyri can't hurt your feelings, and the scribes who wrote them are long dead, we think. Maybe don't read any incantations aloud, and leave me a comment if you've ever accidentally or intentionally summoned shades, apparitions, or ghouls. But the point is, you can also enjoy language learning just for the structure and sounds and so on, without it having to be the same as what other people do. This is where I like apps and books and TV and podcasts and so on, where you don't really have to interact with people, but you can still hear the language and practice the language. Now, if you want to actually go out and talk to people, that's something where I recommend figuring out what social situations you'll be in and learning the shit out of them. This goes for you shy folks too. One of my guilty pleasures is watching YouTube videos from people who claim to have been spies or people who claim they're going to make you more charismatic or whatever. Bear with me on this one. They're often nonsense and more often than not totally blind to culture. But everybody's favorite ex-CIA guy had something that stuck with me, which was that he claimed that you can just prepare for conversations and map them out. You know what you're likely to be asked, you can figure out the next steps if the other person is more or less on autopilot for both a yes or a no or whatever the alternatives are, and you can just map out the whole thing. It's a decision tree. His whole thing was about spending time planning for the unusual, but for those with anxiety or even just shyness, you can game plan a conversation. It's fine. And it's surprisingly effective for most interactions. For language learning, the additional piece everyone needs is a few fixed phrases for getting yourself out of trouble. Things like, I'm sorry, I don't know the word in Italian for this. I mentioned elsewhere the game of describing things and ideas in your target language at your level as you learn them. That's also practice for not having the right word at the right time. For shyness, as opposed to actual anxiety, I would recommend exposure and practice, but do so in a structured way. That's your lessons on online platforms with real people, but you can sign out at any time, and it's a more structured conversation. But signing out, you lose the money, so you actually have an incentive to be there. But that's only if you need to develop the ability to speak and listen in real time in your target language. If you don't have to do language exchanges. And if you decide to do them, I'd recommend planning it out. You can ask for what you want to talk about or study, and you can prepare it in advance. It gets rid of a few degrees of freedom for the unknown. For introverts, it's a little different. I definitely encourage all of the above, plus going out and having those unstructured interactions with people. But built-in recharging. One of my favorite things to do when traveling is to go to museums at off hours. One of my absolute favorite memories from when I was studying Dutch a little more intensively was when I went to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I walked there through a largely empty city, had a short conversation with a barista when I got my morning coffee, skimmed some of the papers and magazines that were left out, and got to the museum just before opening when there was practically nobody there. I spent most of the morning looking at the artwork and reading about it in Dutch. I had like 6 hours of passive learning with probably 15 total minutes of interaction with people. And that conversation with the barista, you better believe I went in with a plan and directed the conversation. For any of the three, the big questions to ask yourself are first, whether you know what your needs are, and second, whether your language learning is aligned with them. For the true introverts, it may just be having quiet time between bouts of extreme levels of social interaction by the other two standards. For the shy, it might be giving yourself space to be shy, but also putting yourself in positions where you can grow socially in your target language, but with guardrails, bowling bumpers, water wings, training wheels. For those with anxiety, that might be a terrible plan. I don't know, I'm not that kind of doctor. For all of the three, here are some suggestions for language learning that don't involve too much social interaction or the threat of judgment. But this is important. Part of how we learn is allowing ourselves the grace to forget things and to get things wrong. And the act of being reminded or being corrected actually helps us learn, which sucks because these are things we often avoid in our first language. So now I have to be forgetful and incorrect in another language. So here's some options. If you're not already, you should be doing things like studying with a course, whether it's a textbook or an app or whatever it is. I use Anki to memorize things as well. If you're self-directed and you're just sentence mining or creating an Anki deck with vocabulary and grammar from your favorite podcast or TV show, that's fine too, but you're probably not asking for advice here. Free writing has been shown to be very effective because you'll realize you don't know how to say what you want to say, and in theory, you either come up with a different way of saying it or you look it up and you learn that. So journaling, basically, works. But you have to go back and correct errors. If you can tolerate having somebody do so for you, that can be over email even. And of course, that's out if you're just learning Latin so you can read Seneca or something. So basically, for learning new vocabulary and grammar, all of the tips and tricks that I mentioned in my video on Fluent Forever will work. But if you want to generate the language, whether written or spoken, and especially if you want to be able to listen to spoken and respond in real time, that's a skill that requires practice and, frankly, being bad at first. So the bottom line for all of this is to go easy on yourself while doing things that will get you to your goal. So that means the going easy on yourself doesn't mean just never studying, but it does mean not beating yourself up about it. And since we're the center of our own stories, it can be easy to feel like we're the center of other people's stories too. But for the shy ones out there, I don't know if this makes it better or worse, but you're not. Whatever social faux pas you're worried about, nobody's going to care. And if they do, and it was something actually minor, that's a them problem. For the introverts, get some quiet time, get some space, get some rest. And we've already established that actual anxiety is above my pay grade, but definitely seek professional care and guidance. It's there and it helps. I really wish I had more of a magic bullet for all of you, but the science of learning is pretty clear. It's a question of having the most effective encoding that you can muster at the time of learning, or encoding, and being challenged to retrieve information in as close as possible to the actual target modality. If you want to speak, you have to learn all the things that you need to be able to speak, but then you also have to practice speaking. But this can also be liberatory for social interactions because you realize you can reverse engineer social interactions and just practice them. And then anyone that didn't go great, that was a practice one. I know I'm not the only one who's learned how to be a better conversationalist in English by learning other languages. So for all of you who asked about this, I hope this helped. Definitely check out my videos on learning and on conversation skills in another language for more. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, please like and subscribe, and please leave me a comment. It is great for the algorithm. If you'd like to support the channel, you can, right here on YouTube with super thanks, or over on patreon.com/languagejones. Until next time, be easy on yourselves and happy learning.